So first of all, André, could you define luxury for us as best you can in your terms?
Certainly, we make an assumption that guests of ours have a level of sophistication, which means that they are worldly, have a sense of who they are, and sort of have an expectation of things that are not just about product-driven things. They're more about an experience. And so for us, I think the luxury is the matching of a sophisticated person, their expectations, and the experience that can be engendered from that. It doesn't necessarily mean the consumption of a product. It's more of a experience is what I would apply luxury to.
So can you take that a bit further and talk to us a little bit more about where you think this idea, and I agree with you, the idea of luxury being much more about experiencing products, experiencing travel. Where do you think that's going in the future, in the next 10 years? Because it's moved so far from where it was 20 years ago.
Well, I like to think that travel is, in a way, one of the last remaining true luxuries, because in addition to money, it requires time. And for example, you can buy almost any product anywhere. And therefore, the purchasing of product per se is not a definition of luxury, regardless of how expensive the product is. I think it's the ability to enjoy something that involves perhaps time, which travel does by definition, that sort of elevates it into a different category of luxury experience. In other words, stepping into a very expensive car in front of your home in Manhattan, by definition, is not as expensive as stepping into a special safari Jeep on the other side of the world.
And I think for all of us, we can probably all remember when we first felt that sort of moment of passion about what we were going to do later in our lives. Can you tell us about the moment that it occurred to you that you might want to be involved in hotels and in the world of luxury and travel?
Well, it's no eureka moment. It was really a sort of a combination of a series of my past interests, which included design, architecture, sculpture, journalism, and somehow the looking back and trying to make sense of, how one gets to where one gets. To me, I think it's the combination of being very interested in physical space and the narrative of the psychological narrative that is involved in storytelling. Bringing those things together is sort of what is the underlying approach to the way we approach a hotel experience. In other words, a hotel is not really about the shape of the sofa or the color of the carpet. It's really about how those are small tools in provoking and supporting a series of emotional experiences.
And just to push you on that a bit further, do you have a memory of a particular hotel you may have visited with your parents or early on in your teens that made you think, oh, this is a really interesting thing that I want to be involved in?
There were two. One was a small hotel that I went to where I grew up near Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's one of the many hotels that George Washington slept in, called the Concord Inn, which I always liked because it was in Concord, Massachusetts, and it had sort of a pub and a bar and a dining room and a living room all together. But perhaps even more than that was an experience. My father and I were traveling through Italy when I was 10, and Germany and throughout Europe. But we stopped in Baden-Baden at the spas there, and that was just such an overwhelmingly fantastical experience between sort of the glamorous people walking in the gardens and the spas and everything, that it was sort of a fabricated world that I was greatly moved by, and sort of thought it was rather cool, never thinking I'd be involved with it.
And glamour seems to run throughout all of your enterprises. Can you it's a nebulous term. Can you sum up for us what glamour means? Because when people think of you or your hotels, they quite often conjure that name, glamour.
I think glamour, like terms like hip or cool or glamour, these are things that are attributed to you. There's not something you chase. You know, it's not something they're attributes that you sort of do something, and it's something, these are labels that get applied to you. I mean, we see it every day, and you know, some little bottega opens somewhere in a quiet, unfamiliar neighborhood, and all of a sudden it's cool. And I think what's going on is not that none of those people are setting out to be cool, because almost invariably if you do, you miss the target and you'll never be that. But I think what happens is people pay attention to what they do, and they do it with integrity, and suddenly the mere specter of integrity becomes something that, you know, has a value, which brings us maybe full circle to luxury, which is perhaps that is the essence of luxury, is an integrity.
And I think you've spoken before about the idea of almost creating a story for your hotels, it's almost like a film production, you've said. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you draw together all of the talents to create these places?
Well, it's a very collaborative effort. I mean, frankly, it's probably very similar to fashion, to film, to theater. These are very big productions. In the case of a hotel, which is what's intriguing about it to me, it's not a moment, it's not a 15-minute long fashion show, it's not a 90-minute long film, it's a 24-hour a day, 7 days a week operation, and it has all these different moments, the private, the public, the intimate, the less intimate, and these things are very, anticipating those moments and programming for them are, to me, what's very exciting about it.
Can you characterize for us or list the things that you think are most important? I mean, obviously staff, obviously you've worked with some star architects, some big names. I mean, what is that package? Do you think, is that the way you think about it in terms of, first of all, you find a property, normally your properties are heritage properties, then you move on to an architect, then how does that work in your mind?
Well, it's always about, let's say, for us it always begins with the creation of a physical place. This isn't true for, I consider myself a hotelier, but basically got into the development business because there weren't hotels around that we really wanted to manage. Part of our business is development, and the development business is very much about, I think, creating a sense that a place that reflects its place. For example, the Mercer around the corner from here is, which opened 10 years ago, you know, it was very much about capturing the spirit of Soho, which at that time was largely about lofts. You know, at that time, it's hard to imagine, but at that time, my biggest concern was that nobody knew where Soho was, and nobody would want to stay here. Our first little mailer had a big map of Manhattan with an arrow showing where Soho was. So, you know, times change, but the goal then, as usual, it was to find and create a place that when you went in there, you felt not only that you were in New York, but you were in Soho, not only in Soho, but in a contemporary version of a building that was, you know, a 110-year-old Romanesque revival building of a certain type that was a manufacturing building. So channeling all of those things, and when you go to the Chateau Marmont, you know, it's one has to recognize the history of Hollywood, the role that faux Loire Valley building, why it was built in the mid-1920s, what it meant, and how to bring that unique aspect to life. For me, a good hotel really gives you a sense of where you are. I mean, it would be a shame to travel to Berlin and not feel like you're in Berlin.
Can you just talk a little bit about brand? I mean, I know we discussed earlier brand, and what does brand mean, what the hell is brand these days, but can you just talk about your perception of a brand? And I think people almost see you as a brand as well. Maybe it's your hotels, but maybe it's what you confer on the hotels.
To some extent, we're all in the business of branding, and so I guess that's the topic a little bit here today. But I think brand, at least on our level, and I think in the original level of how these things go, is really about a name. It's about a name and a reputation, which it starts with that. If you look at almost every couture, every fashion brand, every accessories brand, every automobile brand, these are all businesses that basically started with an individual and with a degree of craftsmanship, i.e. an integrity that then, you know, generation after generation has been built upon. But these brands, I think, are really, it's just another word for a name. And perhaps it's a more scaled name. That's why I don't, you know, if people think that we have a brand, it's intriguing to me. I think we have a name and a reputation. Whether that constitutes a brand is, it's more of an outsider's judgment as to whether what's cool. The homogeneity of brand proliferation throughout the world basically has meant that the product itself means less and less and less. So it's the process of acquiring it, i.e. the experience, which is taking more and more meaning. You know, I got this skateboard from this shop in China, illustrated by this cool Chinese art, you know, graphic designer. That's going to mean something. To us, it's all about the hospitality, which means what are the things that make people feel good? And design and the aesthetics of a place are only one of many, many tools that are available to do something with. And the execution of this is always about people. You know, whether, I mean, there's people involved in the design, but then there's people involved in the maintenance of the design, there's people, it's always people.
And let's just talk about globalization for a moment, because that's on everyone's minds, I think. Do you have a view on that, on how to perpetuate the experience globally? Would you make that a uniform experience?
I think it's exactly the opposite. You know, in my business after the Second World War, when there was a tremendous fear about the instability in the world and the unfamiliarity of the world, the big American hotel chains, the Marriotts, the Hyatts, the Hiltons, you know, one of them had a slogan, you know, the best surprise is no surprise. And, you know, they would build hotel rooms in Boston, Berlin, and Beirut, all of which looked the same. That was the whole point. Hilton International, you know, took it a step further and, you know, tried to, interestingly enough, it was partially funded by the CIA. It was a separate company from the domestic thing, and part of what they were doing was projecting the image of the American society overseas. But in both cases, you know, there was always a goal to these rooms, either to make the American business traveler feel safe by feeling that they were totally in the same place at all times. I think today we're now going totally the other way, which is people want something different. That's why people run around and, you know, go to Africa and come back with, you know, clothing and bags, and that's been their experience, something unique. So I think that what we're seeing even on the domestic branding or the domestic products is people fragmenting things more and more. It's not, nobody wants to be like anyone else anymore. Or as they grow and they try to become more sophisticated, the whole key is to sort of become different while being comfortable with yourself.
Just to move this on and kind of wrap it up, I wanted to talk to you about your newest project, which seems to be a wine, a rosé. Is that what you would term a brand extension?
No, well, that's a perfect extension. You're calling it a brand extension. I just say doing what I like to do.
Yeah.
I love rosé, and you know, we've been sort of pushing rosé, French rosé, on friends for years, and finally thought, you know, since we sell so much of it and personally consume so much of it, I might as well have something that has just the taste that we're looking for. And I have a good friend, Christian Wolford, who owns Wolford Estates in Sagaponack, and they make a very, very good white wine and increasingly really good rosé, and so we thought we'd collaborate and create this local thing that is just right for sipping in Long Island.
So is Ode de André next?
No, I don't think so.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sure.
Fantastic.